You're picking up your cues and it's getting funnier, but something's still missing, right? So let's move on to tool number 2 of the 10 tools of intentional comedy. Yes and. Yes and is probably the number 1 tool of improv, right? Because you have to accept what the other person is giving you and add to it. And that's what keeps the ball bouncing back and forth between each of the actors. It keeps the scene going, the comedy, the energy, the light. It's like the train that keeps moving, okay? So what I have found is that in scripted comedy, there is an implied yes and at the beginning of every line. And so the best way to kind of bring out that humor is to practice that yes and before every single line. Now, remember, this is a tool for practice. It is not to be used in the audition room. And probably the best way for you to get a feel for this is for Eric and I to give you an example. So we're going to use Two Broke Girls again, same scene, and we're going to add in yes and. So we're going to do it 2 times, the first time without yes and the second time with yes and, okay?
Oh, thank you. I'm famished.
And here's your change, $10.
Oh, that's for you. Keep it.
Wow, ma'am, really? Are you rich or something?
Yes, we're extremely wealthy.
Okay, now we'll do it with yes and.
Yes and oh, thank you. Yes and I'm famished.
Yes and here's your change. Yes and $10.
Yes and oh, that's for you. Yes and keep it.
Yes and wow, ma'am. Yes and really? Yes and are you rich or something?
Yes and yes. Yes and we're extremely wealthy.
And now in my head, what I added was a yes and wow at the end, and just to put a button on the scene. I didn't say it out loud, but I said it in my head. So a couple things to remember. 1, this is just for practice. Don't do it in the audition room. And when you're doing it at home, make sure you really say yes. Like, yes, I hear what you say, and I'm going to add to that. Because if it's just as simple like yes and, it's not going to help you. And I think if you practice this a little bit with a friend, you're going to see the real benefits of it. And if you have a comedic monologue, it also works if you yes and your own lines. So you yes and yourself. You go yes and say the line, yes and say the line, yes and say the line. What happens is it really helps you discover your next thought. It's spontaneous, it's interesting, and it also will keep the energy and the timing going. So now you have 2 tools which should hopefully making you a little bit funnier. And just imagine if you had 8 more, because we have 10 tools of intentional comedy. Subscribe below, you'll get the rest.